I am I'm Izzy, otherwise known as Weasel, and I'm a queer Latinx author. I'm also a domestic violence survivor, and I'm the owner and the dude of Weasel Press. Joining me is my partner, Thurston Howe.
Hi, I'm here for emotional support. I'm a bi-gender writer living with HIV.
So, and we're going to talk a little bit about diversity in the fandom. And I know diversity is a very broad topic, so I want to narrow it down today is representation and why representation matters. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is going to be coming from a queer and Latinx perspective, but some of what I talk about can also translate to um, other marginalized voices, such as trans voices, disabled voices, people with HIV, sex workers. So a lot of that is kind of what we're going to be talking about. To just kind of dive right into it, the first thing I want to define here is white savior complex. Now, if you don't know what white savior complex is, it refers to a white person who provides help to non-white people in a self-serving manner. The best example I can give you on that is outside of the fandom earlier this year, there was a book that was published by Janine Cummins. The book was called American Dirt. In this book, Cummings actually writes, or she uses stigmas, tropes, and stereotypes that have been pushed through our news media on undocumented immigrants and the border. Uh, this These stereotypes have been pushed for decades, if not centuries, at this point. Uh, in an interview that she gave earlier this year, she said that she wanted to give face to the faceless. On top of that, she used uh, she used fake little barbed wire fences for her book release party. So what essentially what she's doing is she's not helping undocumented immigrants. She's essentially trying to sell her book. She's using a marginalized group to kind of benefit her rather than actually helping that group. So it's a very cringy ideal. Um, Next thing I want to define is colorblind racism. So colorblind racism is, here's an example. How many people have heard or said, I don't see race, I just see you? Or I don't understand why we're talking about race. Why we're all people. Why can't we just get along? Uh, those are examples of colorblind racism. As a Latinx person, as you can see here, my skin's brown. This ain't going anywhere. I can't peel it off. It's just not going to leave me. If you subscribe to things like colorblind racism, then you subscribe to a viewpoint that says racial privilege does not exist. I know it exists. BIPOC communities know it exists. Racial privilege and essentially white privilege exists. Uh, I bring this up because when furries enter our fandom for the first time, one of the first steps is creating your persona. I can't tell you how many experiences I've had where I would, I have my persona and I would actually be talking to another furry and I would share just a personal photo of myself and they would say, "Oh my God, I didn't realize you were Mexican," or "Oh my God, I didn't realize you were brown." And I'm not the only one who's had these experiences. There are other people of color who, when they take off their fursuits, white furries would say something like, "Oh, I didn't know you were black or you were brown," or so on and so forth. So there is this kind of mentality in the fandom that once you create your persona, your skin color just kind of leaves you, and it's not the case. I mean, for a lot of people who create personas, we throw a lot of ourselves into the persona. I can tell you right now, if you were to strip all of the fur off of my weasel character, you would find brown skin because it's a part of me. It's there. It's not going anywhere. And to know that someone else doesn't see that or someone else doesn't recognize that, it cuts deep. When you uh, when you subscribe to colorblind racism, you discredit experiences from BIPOC communities. Uh, so so you just want to keep that in mind whenever you're writing fiction or just in the fandom in general. Uh, One of the when you work so hard to ignore aspects of a person, you diminish that whole community. You discredit those experiences. And I talked about this documentary before, the fandom uh, that just came out recently. If you look at it, BIPOC furries only got a handful of minutes. It has phenomenal trans representation, but I felt like the film team ignored the whole BIPOC community, which could have been easily fixed by giving us more time to tell our experiences. Uh, and what I want you to take away from that is just learn to see us. If you see us, then you can acknowledge us and you can acknowledge our importance in the fandom. I see the question in the chat, and I'll get to that once I'm finished here. I have a short amount of time, so I'll try to leave some room for questions. Um, but kind of barreling through, one of the topics that I really wanted to hone in on is representation and why that matters. If marginalized communities see themselves constantly written with bad representation, tropes, stigmas, they're going to feel unwelcome. They're going to feel unwanted, undesired, and so much more. Stigma drives popular opinion, and creators pull from stereotypical images because they know the audience is familiar with that. It's a comfort zone. South Park being the biggest example. Whenever South Park features Latinx characters, it's almost always the same kind of image where it's a day laborer who speaks broken English. It's nothing more than that. And as a Latinx person, I can say we are a diverse group of people. We're more than day laborers who speak broken English. Um, to point to a furry source, and this will come from a queer perspective, I'd like to look at TJ Mine's story Waiting in the anthology Inferno. TJ Mine uses what's called the AIDS monster in this story. Now, the AIDS monster is a stigma created in the book and the bands played on by Randy Schultz. It's this idea that someone with HIV will not only willingly spread the virus, but also not care about the consequences. It assigns blame in a situation where blame isn't necessary. It shames people with HIV for having sex, and it makes people with HIV shoulder the responsibility of not only creating a safe environment of not only creating a safe environment for sex, but for accepting the blame if the virus is spread. As my partner says in their book, Blood Criminals, it takes two to tango. Uh, so, in my story, what kind of happens? You have two characters. You have a character, Xander, who is written as HIV positive, and then you have another character, Paige, who's very inexperienced with sex. Um, in the story, the pairing have sex, and Paige later finds out that he's contracted HIV. When he confronts Xander about this, Xander is very uncaring. Um, so in this story, Mine basically creates a uncaring partner, and what that does here is it feeds into queer stigma. So in queer culture, people with HIV are demonized. They're told to kill themselves. They're dehumanized. And by creating Xander as this deviantly uncaring person, it feeds into all of those stigmas. Now, I want to say this real quick. Uh, I understand that TJ Mine had a sensitivity reader. This is a situation where sometimes even sensitivity readers get it wrong. At that point, it's not really about whose fault it is. Regardless of that, the text as it stands exists and reinforces harmful stereotypes. This isn't to critique the original author. This isn't to attack the author or to critique the sensitivity reader. People change, and so do our politics. Um, the next text that I want to look at is Krishni's Red Engines. It was published in Dogs of War 2, uh, and it was actually pulled from that anthology. So the publisher did decide to pull the story from Dogs of War Volume 2. Essentially, what Schnee does in his stories, he uses uh, anti-Muslim anti-Muslim sentiment to create this world where essentially he paints the Muslim world as brainwashed and they're all terrorists and they all want to kill us. He creates this very fear-filled world that has been fed to America for decades, if not centuries. Uh, it's it's a very dangerous story when you look at it because anti-Muslim sentiments, vandalism, uh, attacks, murders, all of that has gone up within the past decade at least, according to the ACLU. So by writing these stigmas, it's feeding into a societal stigma. It's reinforcing that. It's saying, oh, this is okay. And it's really not. It's not okay at all. So what Krishti did in his story was Islamophobic, and it's very terrible what he did. Um, that being said, like I mentioned earlier, Fur Planet did decide to pull the story from the anthology, which was a good move. Um, Now, I'm going to bet that most of you, if not all, have seen Zootopia, or at least heard about Zootopia. Uh, Zootopia came out in 2016. In 2016, America was having conversations about white supremacy, the police state, and the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, that being said, these topics have been discussed way before that. They've been constantly happening in our country. But in 2016, it was becoming more prominent in the news. In September of 2016, protests broke out in Charlotte, North Carolina, which the news would later call violent and eventually riots. According to the Huffington Post, at least 258 Black Americans were killed by police in the year 2016. Zootopia is a movie that ties racial discourse between predator and prey. Black, indigenous, and other people of color are coded as predators, white people are coded as the prey. It's a film that's pro police, and it's a film that, like our news media, it paints BIPOC citizens, or in Zootopia's case, predators, as violent and angry, and that we need to be controlled. It's a film that tells us that anger is unproductive and that marginalized communities aren't entitled or allowed to be angry. Zootopia, in and of itself, is a Blue Lives Matter propaganda film. Uh, so, furthering this, to go outside of the fandom real quick, um, to give you a sense of what positive representation looks like, at least for me, is the film Machete. In the film Machete, you'll see a couple of things. You'll see Latinx characters portrayed in a badass and positive light. They're fighting to live in a country that does not want them. They're fighting to live in America that is dead set on murdering and sending them back to quote wherever they came from. At the same time, you'll see white people being seen as the monsters. And I understand that this is a grindhouse film. I understand that this is a grindhouse film, and that exploitation is meant to be over the top. But the representation of white people in Machete wasn't over the top for me. A lot of what happened in that film, the slurs, the militias that were camping out at the border, a lot of those things are very real and very much happen today. When I look at the white people in Machete, I look at my next door neighbor. I have been called a spick, a beaner, a wetback. I have been fetishized because of my skin color. I've been asked to be a gardener because I'm brown. And I've had an ex partner tell me that my skin feels weird because I am not white. All of these things, give or take, can be found in Machete. When I look at white people in that film, it's like I'm looking at my next door neighbor. When that movie came out, it was called a racist film because it called for violence against white people. And when I saw that critique, all I could ask was, how does it feel? You know, marginalized communities have been portrayed in such a negative light for decades. And then to have a film where white people are seen as the monsters, it's again, we want to know how that feels for y'all because for us, it's fairly normal, and it's unfortunately normal. So I'm saying all of this not to shame white people or not to kind of wag my finger or anything. I'm saying this to tell you that it's important that we not only talk about these stigmas, but that we shed light on them and that we create a better representation to have people of color that have marginalized voices in our communities because we are a part of your communities. We're in every bit of your community. We're in your neighborhoods, we're in your churches, or even where you work. uh, we're here and we deserve to be seen. So uh, I got a few minutes, so I'm going to try and rush through my last topic here, which is publishing. Um, so I'm going to talk about publishing, and then I'm going to see if I can take questions. Uh, at the same time, you can always message me on Discord and Telegram. I'll try to give you my Telegram info. Uh, but real quick, I'm going to talk about publishing here and going off of the furry writers market. On the FWG website, there are 9 furry publishers. There's a couple that aren't on there, so if you're a publisher and you're not on there, definitely get with our guild president so we can get you on the website. But out of those 9 publishers, there are 2 that say that they encourage marginalized voices. That's myself, Weasel Press, and Hybrid Inc. Uh, most of the submission calls that are out there don't even include a statement encouraging marginalized voices to submit. And I hear it from publishers a lot. I hear it outside the fandom and inside the fandom of one, how am I supposed to know this person is a marginalized voice if they don't say so on their Twitter? And 2, these people don't even submit to us. Why should they should understand that we are open anyways. So first of all, if you're not inviting marginalized voices to your space, we're not necessarily comfortable because we have felt because we have been discredited, we have been stigmatized, we have been fetishized before. Not every space is comfortable for us. So to know that a place is safe for us, to know that a place does welcome us, is enlightening and engaging for us, and that we're going to want to be drawn to that space. Um, let's see. So thank you. Hal is kind of helping out with the chat because I keep getting distracted here. No, it's good. It's good. Uh, so yeah. So what I would advocate for in publishing is just open your arms. Have a statement that says, "Hey, we're here for marginalized voices. We want you to submit to us." As a community, we need to advocate for better publishing practices. Advocate for publishers including diverse voices on their staff, guest editors, making projects that target diverse voices. That's happening right now in a way with Weasel Press doing "Can You See Us Now?" We've even changed our whole guidelines to where it's just focused on marginalized voices. Um, Thurston Howe Publications is doing the same with Di-Fur-Sity, which right now has a Kickstarter going and is seeking submissions from BIPOC voices. Um, Again, Hybrid Inc. I'm not sure if Hybrid Inc. is open for submissions or if they're closed, but on their website it does say that they do support and they do want marginalized voices as part of their press. So we need to be essentially these projects need to grow. They need to be amplified. We need to tweet, retweet, talk about BIPOC artists and creators and things of that nature. We need to kind of not just uplift but amplify all of that because we are important to this fandom. We are important to the creation of this fandom. The creator of the Fursona uh, is a Black American, and in the movie The Fandom, he got a couple of seconds when we probably should have learned more about him. So, so yeah, um, kind of looking at the chat here. Let's see what's going on. Anything that you can? Anything you want to add?
No, you can go for it.
Okay. So what have you taken care of first?
We talked about we've been talking a lot about Zootopia.
Okay.
There was still that earlier question about BIPOC personas.
BIPOC personas. Okay. So first of all, it's never okay to really ask if the person is BIPOC or not. But I think what we want to see more of is people not being so shocked when we exist. It's not about. It's not about. It's kind of hard to answer in that way. It's not really about saying that persona is BIPOC. It's more so about the. It's more so about normalization. That's what I'm getting at. It's not you need to know this. It's you need to not be surprised when you find this out. Again, it frustrates me, and I'm sure it frustrates a lot of BIPOC voices out there when we show ourselves, and the first thing that comes out of a person's mouth is, "I didn't realize you were Mexican." So it's more so just killing that shock. People of color are normal, and the fact that that shock happens tells us that we're not exactly, and that's what we want to do is to normalize BIPOC voices in the fandom. So.
Another thing brought up was in regards to Zootopia. Domus says it's not like Disney can go out and be anti-police. What do you think of that?
I mean, no, I think they could be anti-police. I mean, I understand that they have an image, but image says they're a multi-million-dollar corporation. I do think that they can take a stance with marginalized communities. So no, I don't. I don't think Disney needs to side with the police. No. What would you say to that?
Oh, I'd agree. I think Disney can say whatever political message it wants to, and for it to be so.
Yeah, it's not going to lose much money if it decided against. So it's really not.
Right, as Coyote says, Zootopia didn't have to be written as a police story. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yolfin also says blind furries were out there. Digital versions of published works is a start to making free literature more accessible and available to us.
Exactly, and that was something that was brought to my attention earlier, Yolfin, and thank you for telling me that. And we're definitely going to work on trying to make our publications more accessible.
Yep.
So.
Yep, I'm going to poke Cedric at Thurston Howell Publications to make that speed up a little bit.
So, what else do we have here?
Janora, why do BIPOC look for publishers that actively say they encourage diversity? Because they've been burned too often otherwise.
Where'd you see that? Oh, I just wait. Where?
Janora? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly the case. We have been burned too much otherwise. I think I mentioned it last night in our sex panel that I, as a Latinx person, I'm not really comfortable with submitting my work to a white editor if I don't know if they're in support of, say, Black Lives Matter, or uh, if they're racist or anything. Like, if I don't know these particular aspects to them, I'm not going to support them. I'm not going to submit to them. So.
Another person says, should these matters be extended to other groups, physical disabilities, Jews, etc.?
Oh, absolutely. So, right, like I said earlier, I'm coming from queer and Latinx. But a lot of what I'm talking about does extend to other marginalized voices, especially people with disabilities, people who have HIV, sex workers. We need to actually support all marginalized voices. So yeah, most definitely.
The next one, what do you feel about entertainment that claims to attack stereotypes by directly portraying them in order to make fun of how ridiculous said stereotypes are? I have thoughts on that one too.
Well, let's go with your thoughts first. I want to hear.
So I immediately think of blaxploitation, because the very word for it was used to actually critique that 5-7 years of film by saying, "Oh yes, this portrays these stereotypes that white people have of black people, and this is exploitation." So the word blaxploitation was coined to critique those few years of film. But at the same time, it was a subgenre of film that was largely praised by the American Black community. So it was this time where it's like we got representation that hadn't been had before. It was fairly unique in that regard, even though the quality of the representation could have been a lot better.
Yeah. So it's a lot like Machete in that, in where we have Latinx representation, and it's a very positive representation in my mind. That film came out 10 years ago, so it's. I hear the point of representation matters, but I think we need to do better at actually getting good representation.
Yeah, exactly. Resolute says, speaking as a bi person with autism, 100% diversity should be extended, yes. Just going off of that, the next comment from, let me see if I can get it right this time, KO Day, there we go, KO Day, says, one thing that bugs me about disabilities is mental disabilities are also discriminated against. I have ADA accommodations, and I'm sure that's part of the reason I'm being laid off. Going off that, I'm bipolar with manic psychosis. That is a safe mental disability to have.
And that's something I would agree with. It's like, yes, we need to have support of all disabilities, including mental disability. I very much agree.
And by support, you're meaning not just in fiction representation, but also in the anthology calls themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. We need to have good representation in publishing, in art, and all anthology calls. Definitely.
Domus says, remember Coonskin by Ralph Bakshi. He portrayed black stereotypes in his film, but made fun of them and even hired African American animators and graffiti artists.
I've not actually seen that film. I've heard about it, but I've not seen it, so it's not something that I can talk on at this point. We do have just a couple minutes left, so I'll take about two more questions and then we'll head out. And Hal, can you give them can you give them our telegram information?
There's another question for you.
Okay, so the main problem with portraying stereotypes as ridiculous is that you cannot be certain that people won't take it seriously anyways. That's what Poe's law actually is. It's impossible to create something so over the top that people won't believe it. I could kind of.
I'm just adding.
No, okay. Yeah, I mean, I could see that point. It's like you can't necessarily do something that is exploitive and expect people to say it's just a joke. And I get that. And not everything can be seen as a critique of that. I can understand that. So.
Tom Beckett adds that film by Ralph Bakshi. I own the VHS version renamed Street Fight. Probably a good thing. I've been curious about hearing more thoughts on it, as well as I've heard, as all I've heard is an interview where Bakshi claimed that those who saw it loved it.
Well, it's definitely something that I think we'll watch the list and kind of get back with you on that. We do have review blogs. I know I've got a review I can share. So that's definitely something that we can look at.
Resolute says intersectionality is important. Discrimination and power balance affect different groups in different ways. There's Venn diagrams involved from people who are LGBTQ plus and BIPOC and disabled, etc.
Absolutely, yeah. Intersectionality is crucial, I think.
Yep.
So, yeah,
absolutely.
Couldn't agree more.
Yolfin says, kind of like how some are interpreting dystopian stories or punk as instructionals rather than warnings. Yeah.
Yep.
I get that for sure. So. It's interpretation matters, and it's hard to. Like with representation, you have to really watch how the narrative could be read because, especially with like parody stories, is this actually parodying the stereotype or parroting the stereotype?
Yeah, it's definitely a fine line that you have to really be careful to cross.
Yeah.
So you have to really be conscious of what you're doing at that point. So, but that is the last minute for us. It looks like we're having a good conversation in the chat. So I definitely thank you guys for coming in here. If you want to see us more, you can hit me up on Discord. I'm in the Dealer's Den at Weasel Press, and we will see you around. Thank you guys for coming out.